Okay, so welcome to the Transfer of Wealth webinar where we're going to talk about the power of 5%, and that is the 5%, capturing 5% of that transfer of wealth that is about to happen over the next, we're really going to talk about it in the framework of 10 years in Kentucky. And so the objectives for this webinar are to understand what the transfer of wealth is and to consider how to communicate about it in your community, and then to just have a discussion and learn from one another. And we're going to pull up a couple of the community foundations with which we're doing strategic planning right now, and that's the Perry County Community Foundation and the Upper Cumberland Community Foundation. And we'll kind of dive into a little conversation about what does the transfer of wealth mean for these two community foundations and how do we communicate about it? But we will look at the numbers for all the other community foundations as well. So quickly, we'll just get an idea of what are we talking about when we're talking about the transfer of wealth. And so that is basically an estimate of individual household wealth from which charitable giving could be realized. And so when we look at these numbers for the transfer of wealth, it does not include things like businesses and organizations and nonprofits that are out there and the wealth that they hold. That we are looking solely at individual households within our communities. And the United States is in the midst of the greatest transfer of wealth in our history right now. Between 2017 and 2066, so we're basically looking 50 years out, an estimated $72 trillion, and that's in 2016 numbers, so estimated on those 2016 dollars, $72 trillion will transfer from one generation to the next. In the Commonwealth of Kentucky, this transfer represents about $716 billion. That's for the entire state. But what does it represent for your community? And so before we start getting into the numbers about this, there was a video that Kathy Allen had shared with us that really does a pretty good job of explaining and describing what the transfer of wealth is. And so I thought we might take a look at that video to start out. So here we go with that. And hopefully this will just go to that. Can you all actually see the video screen now? Okay, good. And I'm hoping you can hear it too. And I apologize. I see that John said you all couldn't actually hear the sound on that. So I forgot to click the little icon about sharing my computer sound, but that basically just had music in the background. But we're going to go through this and watch it one more time after we talk about it. And I'll make sure the sound's turned on just so you all can kind of see what they did with the music. So apologies for that. But after looking at that video, just seeing the text that popped up, so they use text that way. What's your biggest takeaway about the transfer of wealth, just from watching that for one quick time?
I don't think anybody has any idea how much wealth they have in their community, regardless. If this is Boone County, Kentucky, I assume it's northern Kentucky, so I would think that they're a little bit wealthier. But even if you look at our poor, persistent poverty regions, you discover that that number aggregated is far bigger than anybody thinks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious as to where that information came from, even on your previous slides. How are we estimating? Is that census? Where's that information come from?
The first transfer of wealth study that was done by the Kentucky Philanthropy Initiative, they actually got their information from the census, but they realized that that information was outdated. And they did that study like in 2011, I think, 2010 or 11. Probably would have been 11 because of census data. But in 2017, they did the study again, and they got the information for the study from ESRI, which is the, I have it later on in the slide what that stands for. But it's basically GIS data that is pulled together by a research firm in California. And I don't really know what their source material is, if it's American Community Survey, so that it's updated more recently or what, but those numbers are actually pulled in from a GIS company, Geographic Information Systems company, for the latest study that the Kentucky Philanthropy Initiative had commissioned. So, Bobby, do you know any more about that as a foundation member? I know.
Sorry, unfortunately, I don't.
That's quite all right. I understand. It's okay, because it's pretty complex. I think the way they pull this information together. So
you might. This morning's Herald Leader has an article that points out that Kentucky is among the lowest states in the country in terms of the percentage of giving and volunteer time. I think it's broke. The volunteer time, I think, is better, sort of in the middle. But in terms of giving, according to that article, we've got a bigger, we have a bigger barrier than some other states to give. Now, I don't know if it's based on, I assume when they do those studies that it takes into account the amount of what their rating is based on percentages. I don't know if you've seen that article, but it's in here in the morning, today's Herald Leader.
Is it? I'll see if I can find that and send it with the resources that I send out as well. So
I think another takeaway for me is 5%, right? I mean, and what does 5% really look like?
Right.
I think that some hang up could be, though, is when you said, like, the video talks about in the next 10 years. I don't know that I want to give away 10% or 5% of my assets before I pass. I pray God I don't pass within the next 10 years. Yeah. So, for me, I'm thinking maybe further down the road. So that, I think, is another thing is getting folks to plan today for later if they're not going to, give now, because it's just real easy to go, oh, that's interesting, because that's not applicable to me right now.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
This is Surekha, if I may say so. But we did, when we planned our estate in 1987, children were still small. We put in 5% of our estate. As children grew up, they went on to their own life. They are making a good living. So we about 5, 6 years ago, we got together as a family. They said, Daddy and Mommy, we don't want money because if we are already making enough, and if we make more, that will be, it won't be right, because our children will turn out to be vagabonds because they don't have the inspiration to work hard. I'm not saying poverty is the inspiration, but it does add to your accomplishments, your goals. So we got together about, maybe I believe it was in 2014, 15, and we have it as 5% to 20 different people. I mean, the charity organizations. So we made it 100% that way. It's not going to go on to children at all, but we made it not irrevocable. Things change. So we may make changes, like some of the things are not, like we had a Prestonsburg Rotary Club. Now there is no Prestonsburg Rotary Club. We may have to change that. So we have a liberty to make changes, but we both don't believe in other than giving our values, education to our children. We don't think we should give anything more. And my children are the ones, they put that idea in our head. I did not think about it because Indians want to keep it for tomorrow, day after tomorrow, for next 10 generations. That is our mentality. But my children are being born and brought up in this country. They have a different mentality. And I believe that I am a student of life. And I would love to learn different things. And this is what I learned from my children. Not keep it for your next generations, give it now. But we want to give it, as Melissa said, give it after we pass away. And give now a little bit so that we can enjoy, see the fruits of what we have given. Yet not have a financial pinch. If that makes sense.
That absolutely makes sense. And the whole idea of 5% was listed throughout this video because 5% actually does feel quite doable to set that aside.
One thing.
I feel my concern is that she was talking about how in the Indian culture that maybe that's not customary and that that's something that they've learned. I think that some of this is, well, not some, I think a lot of this is not customary in rural Eastern Kentucky because this is an area that has routinely been faced with poverty. And much of the wealth, the people who are now wealthy, however you define that, haven't always been wealthy. And a lot of these people grew up, some of these people have money and the money has passed down from a different generation, but some other people were kind of bootstrap kind of folks. And they don't really want to turn loose of that as easily, because in their minds, it was kind of hard to make. So 5%, yes. Boy, I wish I could be Warren Buffett and like that and just say, okay, I'm just going to give it all away and I'm not going to have to worry about that next generation. But I think generally speaking, a lot of folks around here are like, man, I worked hard for that. And I just can't necessarily give it all away. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. Gosh, no, I don't mean that. And I'm not implying that. I'm just saying from a buy-in perspective, from a marketing perspective, and going out and trying to get folks to join in, 5% is certainly doable. But I still think some people were thinking 5%. Yeah, I don't know about that now. I've had conversations with my husband, and I'm still trying to sell him on 5%. I'm sold on 5%. But he's not sold on 5% yet because he's thinking about his kids and he's thinking about passing it on. So I don't know.
Well, one of the things I thought the video missed an opportunity for was adding in the idea, they acted like you're just giving it, and then, you know, these other people will make the world a better place. And it didn't introduce the idea that that giver could direct that giving, you know, to its impact, and it didn't suggest the idea that you could have your children manage the gift, you know. And those were two primary, I think, those are motivators for people that, you know, if we were to do marketing of this nature, I think it would be beneficial to us to look at it, and to look at it. I also thought you did 5%. Well, let's do 1% and see what we could get done. You know, I mean, you know, just let's do some figuring back and forth there, but also introduce the idea that you can have control over the direction of that charitable contribution. And I thought they kind of left out that as well, in their video. Otherwise, it was this great the moving of all these letters and stuff was fantastic. They paid somebody a lot of good money for that.
And it's really good with the music. So we're going to get to look at, I'm going to try to make time for us to look at it one more time, and I'll have the music playing.
What she said makes a lot of sense. We established our foundation. It is family. So that after we pass away, the money our children can, you know, can take care of it, who they want to give and things like that. That's why we have a family foundation.
Sure. Yeah. And Bobby, you were trying to say something.
Yeah. So I took away two things from the video. One, I was curious what the breakdown of those billions of dollars were. How much of that is coming from, you know, millionaires that live in Kentucky versus how much is just like having a lot of people in the middle class who are willing to give that 5%, you know? And I think that's an important thing to know, because it helps us to come up with a plan of
one of the, as I was looking at the transfer of wealth studies, one of the things that they do is and we're going to talk about this, so we'll pop ahead here.
Bill?
I need to be in the right screen here. But you know, in the transfer of wealth study, one of the things they do is they look at current net worth of the whole county, and then they break it down by the number of households, and they say, here's this broken down by the number of households, and it's simply dividing the current net worth by the number of households in the community. And they do that as a way to be able to do comparisons among communities, because the current net worth for the whole community is so driven by the population, the number of people who live there. But that number to me, the number that is the current net worth broken down by household is not a really super helpful number, because you'll end up with something like,
it's just an average.
Yeah, it's just an average. And, you know, it doesn't tell you anything about where to target your funding, that kind of thing. But so we've had some conversation, just to keep us moving along. We've had some conversation about what that video did and what it broke down. And so what I had done is an assessment of, okay, what did this video really do? What are the messages that it went, and what was the order that the messages went in? And so the first message that you got is what you do makes a difference. The transfer of wealth, that's pretty impressive numbers. So we got these big numbers that makes everybody go kind of, wow. But look at something that's small and doable, that 5%, or maybe it could be 1%. And then it provides these visuals of what 5% looks like. And it says, you know, when you give blood, I mean, you give 5% of your blood, but you can still walk, you know? So that was kind of an effective, I noticed folks chuckled at that when that came across. And so then they talked a little bit about short-term impact to long-term impact. So what are the things that we could do with that 5%? What can we do with that money? Things like we could buy books for a literacy program. We could cover costs for feeding children. We can provide health care for women who need it. So those concrete programs lead to big results. And then they talked about breaking the cycle of poverty, and all with just 5%. And so they kind of led the viewer. Of course, now I looked at this thing like 15 times, analyzing it and thinking about what is the pathway that they use to get you from how you can make a difference with just 5% and then back to that message again. And so that is a kind of a breakdown of what was in that video. And some of what you all expressed, you know, talked about these things and picked up on these things. So, and then if we look specifically at the numbers that the video emphasized, one of them was the county's net worth. So it started talking about Boone County, and I don't think it is Boone County, Kentucky. I think that might be Boone County, Iowa or Idaho or somewhere like that. But anyway, the county's net worth, the amount that is expected to transfer, the amount that represents 5%, and then the amount that like if you spend 5% of the 5% that you've collected, what does that look like as grant making capacity? All of those numbers are numbers that come out of these transfer of wealth studies. And those numbers are available to you through the transfer of wealth study that has been done through Kentucky Philanthropy Initiative. And so that's where you can find information on your community and I'm kind of moving quickly through this because I want to get us back to talking as a group again. So we're going to get back to having conversation as a group. But you can find this transfer of wealth report from the Kentucky Philanthropy Initiative. They commissioned it. The latest one was in 2017. So it uses 2016 income information. And the transfer of wealth opportunity that it talks about in this study are just estimates and scenarios of the most likely future that we could see given trends in giving and the way that they have seen community foundations give 5% of endowments and things like that. And so they're really a most likely future trend. So they're not numbers that are set in stone by any means. And they make that very clear in the report. So there are some terms that I wanted to quickly go through that are in that study. And so for me to understand it as a layperson, I had to figure out what these terms meant. And so I thought it might be helpful for you all to understand what they meant by these terms. And so there's current net worth, which provides the base year amount. In this case, it's for 2016, for the combined net worth of all the households in a community, in a single county, community being county in this context. The current net worth of a community is usually higher in counties where you have more households, simply because you have more people, and so you have more wealth. The per household values, this is where they break it down as an average per household. So you're going to see that in the charts that they have in this study. They're going to have per household values in there. And that allows for these comparisons across geographies. And the per household value is the net worth or transfer of wealth value that's divided by the number of households in whatever geography you're looking at. And this transfer of wealth study does it for the state of Kentucky. It does it for the whole nation. It does it for the area development districts, and it does it for each county. So then there's the value. The value is the total wealth that is likely to transfer in the number of years that are indicated in the chart. And they look at it for 10 years, 20 years, or 50 years. And most communities, they say, use the transfer of wealth in the 10-year scenario for planning purposes because it's a lot easier to see ahead out 10 years than 50 years, which is kind of what Melissa was saying earlier, I think, that, thinking that much further out. But you get to those 50-year scenarios and the numbers get really big because wealth will have grown quite a bit. And then they talk about 5% capture and 5% payout. And these are the hypothetical goals that are suggested as reasonable by the 5% capture was suggested as reasonable by the Nebraska Community Foundation around 2005. And I think that may be when they first really started getting into doing these transfer of wealth studies. And the studies have shown that communities have been realizing this 5% goal based on their 10-year transfer of wealth opportunity. So in 2005, that got kind of proposed as let's look at a 5% capture, and they've seen that actually has been doable of playing out over the last couple of decades. So, and then the 5% payout, this payout rate is historically reasonable for the philanthropic environment in the U.S. and can be equated to grant making capacity basically for the community foundation. So that's a lot of quick kind of terms thrown at you, but that's what you're going to be seeing in the next charts that we look at. And here's where I show where the data in the transfer of wealth study, there's a section, if you pull down that study and look at it, they talk about how the information they use is provided by ESRI, which is Environmental Systems Research Institute, a supplier of geographic information systems that's out of California. So they are getting their data from somewhere, and I didn't actually dive down deep enough to find out where their data is coming from, but they do all this GIS work.
Donna, it
and
seems
collect
to me
data.
at one time I read that that was from the Treasury, you know?
Yeah.
I was thinking that they were accessing Treasury information,
Mhm.
which is in fact IRS information.
Okay, so that could very well be, and that would make sense because that's probably the most up-to-date data, income-wise and wealth-wise for people.
So how can that be public? I mean, I mean, I'm not doubting you, Sandy, but that's actually quite scary that somebody out there, even under the guise of research, can actually access, IRS records.
Well, it's actually, I think it's an aggregation. You know, it's like we can't tell you the individuals, but we can tell you how much money is in the county or in the city limits or those types of things where you're not able to drill down to the individual level, but
Yeah. Oops. So if we look at, I did pull the numbers for the transfer of wealth over the next 10 years. So this is 2017 to 2026 for the affiliate community foundations. And I broke out the Upper Cumberland because you all had several counties. And so this is what the numbers looked like according to the Transfer of Wealth study from Kentucky Philanthropy Initiative. The net worth, so this is 2016 dollars, remember, for the counties in the Upper Cumberland Community Foundation is $15.2 billion. That's your current net worth. So I didn't pull out the numbers. They're in the study, the numbers that show the per household average, because I honestly didn't find those super useful for this purpose. So, but you can find those. They're in the Transfer of Wealth study. So you can just pull that down and look at it. The expected transfer over the next 10 years is, I think that would actually be like $1.3 billion because it's 1,328.14 million. But that's what can be expected to transfer over the next 10 years. And then if you capture 5% of that, you're talking about $66.4 million that could be captured within the Upper Cumberland Community Foundation service area. And 5% giving capacity out of that, grant capacity is 3.32 million. And so we have the other community foundations. You can see that there's a pretty big range of the collective net worth in each community. And again, that could be related to the population in the county and could just be related to the overall median income level in the communities too, and housing market and those types of things, because I think housing market has a lot to do with your wealth, value of housing and such too. But so I won't go through all of these numbers individually, but I just want to stop and see if there are any observations that folks have here or thoughts that you have about what you see in these numbers.
Well, I can see where the Upper Cumberland's going to run into some challenges maintaining its regionality over time, because if you take our 3.32 million and you divide it by 5, you get a grant capacity to share among the 5 counties of 0.66. And that's fine, except Laurel County is going to be going, what?
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be interesting to see how that works, how invested Laurel County is to regionality.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also crazy to see the expected transfer of wealth. In a lot of these, it's around 10%, which if you're considering inflation and growth of assets that actually stay here, that's on quite a decline. And that just emphasizes why we need to capture that 5% on the way out.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the reasons I think that the transfer of wealth study was done years ago is because there was such outmigration done that was happening in our communities. And so when you have the folks who have stayed here, the older generations, and their children have gone away, that money transfers out of these communities, and just how's it going to come back? Any other thoughts about these numbers?
I actually downloaded that report
Mhm.
I will say that to me, it looks like that the data is kind of being pulled from a variety of dates. It does kind of give a little bit of information about where it's coming from. It's coming from the U.S. Federal Reserve, but it's coming from some type of findings from a report from 2007.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm very interested to know if there are any efforts or discussions about updating this information.
Mhm.
And that, by the way, is found on page 41 of that report.
Okay, good.
Has there ever been a discussion? I mean,
I
I know
think
you might
the
not have heard
key
anything.
will be to keep our children here. So to entice them,
Amen.
to create jobs.
That's
You know,
true.
that is the main thing.
Mhm.
I'm from Floyd County. Maybe I'm prejudiced. I'm sorry. But I have seen Floyd County go down, and that hurts because this is my mother. Floyd County is my mom. And you don't want your mom to go down health-wise. So we have to do everything in our power to make sure we create those jobs and make sure our children stay in this country. I mean, this county.
Mhm. But you know, one of the difficulties I think we have is that now I'm talking about people of significant means, right?
Mhm.
So I'm thinking of a very particular family right now. Their adult children, you know, they don't, I mean, I guess they have jobs, but their company, their family jobs, you understand what I'm saying. Um, they don't have any reason to quote unquote work in Perry County because it's not a go to job, 8 to 5. It's a different kind of environment, if all that makes sense. So they've chosen to live in Lexington.
Mhm.
And so when the father's already passed, and so when the mother passes, that's all that's going to go to Lexington. They don't have, I think that we have to be careful that we don't assume that everybody from means has an 8 to 5 job, because they really don't. And so some do, but not everybody does. So they could live anywhere they wanted to. And what's their incentive to live here if they don't have an 8 to 5?
Well, and Melissa, that's the more we're able to work remotely, the worse that's going to become, actually. I mean, on one hand, it could attract more people to come to our area and work, but on the other hand, it may create an even greater group of people working from an RV and traveling the world and not having any address at all. But I do think that our motivation, I agree with Sukara. We've got to demonstrate to the world that Eastern Kentucky is the finest place to raise kids, because it's small town life, that you're still able to make an income. And we have an obligation to make sure that these communities at least kind of look like they're alive, so that when you do come down and show your kids where you went to school, you're not crying because it's the saddest thing you've ever seen, and I think if we can do those things. I also think of a family out of Harlan, that all the cousins, all the grandkids, all of them, they own a great deal of property in Harlan. And even though not a one of them lives there, they still, out of an obligation to where their wealth came from, are constantly looking at ways to create industries that provide jobs for those people that they left behind. And that's a story of community ownership that needs to be spread near and far. You don't have to live here to still want to take care of where your roots are from.
Yeah.
Well, and Sandy, what you say is that if, just like the video showed, the difference or the impact that these dollars could make in the form of grant making, if we can, if the water level of the entire community raises and it goes up, then when someone does come back and take a look around, or even someone new comes and takes a look around, the picture that they're going to have may be considerably different than what you and I see when we, look around. And so I certainly think it's worth it to work on making our community and it sounds very trite to just say making it, you know, better, but there is a lot to that, and there's a ripple effect
Yeah.
of that not only impacts our kids and maybe their interest to stay here, but then, you know, other people that have never been here that come here and go, you know, this is a pretty neat place, I think I'll stay. So
You know, and we can't forget, and I'm sorry, Donna, I know you need
No,
to go
no,
on, but
no, no, it's
we
fine.
can't forget, you know, these, you know, our grandparents have roots here, okay? But there's a couple of generations that parents moved either with the military or with their corporate jobs. They actually don't have a rooted place, and are envious of people who can say, my folks are right here, you know, and that rootedness. And if we could provide for them a place to put roots with a good lifestyle in a beautiful location, you know, I think we might be able to attract some of them to help replace those that, you know, can't give up the Lexington Country Club.
Yep.
mhm.
And I only switched slides because you're actually getting into the conversation that is what we wanted to get into. In that, so in here we had Perry County first, but we also, I thought we might talk about Upper Cumberland as well. But, you know, what is the message that you want to share as a community foundation? And I think, you know, these numbers are super impressive, that we've got all this wealth that we could pull down from to get, you know, to invest in our community. But just the fact that the numbers are there is not what draws people into transferring a portion of their wealth. It's what you all are talking about. It's what Sareka referred to as the community is my mother, and I want to invest in my mother. And you know, so we're hearing it from Perry County, we're hearing it from Upper Cumberland, we're hearing it from Floyd County, that we have to invest in our communities. And so, is that the message that really needs to be shared around the transfer of wealth?
I think so. I mean, first of all, I think what the number shows is that it changes that conversation about a scarcity of wealth into, yeah, there's wealth here. You know, you might think there's not, but there's wealth here. So it starts to chisel away at that, you know, and it starts to put personal responsibility on the individual to be able to explore the options, trying to come up with a way, a vision of how that contribution could work to change their community, so that the wheels start to turn there. But I would suggest to you there's the second factor in that, and that is, how much do they trust us to manage it? Okay. So there's not only the ability that we have to communicate, but we also have to build the relationships that we are the trustworthy sources. You're not going to have to worry that sometime they're going to find out that your sheriff, you know, absconded with the property taxes and is now in jail for 30 years and featured on 60 Minutes because, okay, you know, it's going to, you know, we are above that, you know, and that we are trustworthy, and we have a mechanism so that this never ends.
So one of the things that I would say here too is, so I would look at this a couple of different ways. And I'm going to be not political right now, but I am going to talk about conservative versus progressive, and how they would view this. And I think the message could be different for different folks, right? So for conservative people, I could see this message being, you know, instead of expecting the government to step in, instead of expecting someone else, you know, to, you know, have to provide more tax dollars and all of that kind of stuff, a better, possibly smarter way, however you want to phrase that to your conservative friends, would be is, let's help our own. And oh yeah, by the way, did I mention you get a tax break? And so that might be a message for conservative folks. For progressive people though, this is kind of a grassroots effort of pulling together our resources and being cooperative and being able to reach out and make a personal difference. Again, rather than expecting a government program to tell us how it is, we can do something and kind of build our own. So I think that there is two different messages there that you could portray depending upon who you're talking to. And I think that we should be mindful of that. I think another thing too is, in our world, like in Perry County Community Foundation, this number that you showed on the screen before would actually would eightfold our amount of grant making each year. So I would also tell them of the projects we couldn't fund. And I would say, you know what, we had an application for this, but we didn't get to do that. And we had an application for this and we didn't get to give them as much as they asked for. But you know, if we could secure this 5%, our giving would go up eightfold. And then not only would we be able to do that, but maybe we would have given them more, or maybe we could have helped 5 schools instead of just 1 school, and you know, things like that. So I think that that's also part of the messaging that I would try to do. But anyhow, those are just some ideas that I have.
I love that, Melissa. I'm going to jump in there with one other thing. There's another group of people who don't believe in endowments. They feel like all money should be spent and it should, you know, and so I'm looking at the 17.44 million. We probably need to be ready to be able to explain about if we were to invest it, how many more years we could make grants, you know, and how that dollar value translates and ellipses the 17 over time. You know, that, you know, if you take that 17 million and give it out that year, you know, but instead you do the 3.32, but yet it goes on for infinity. You know, at what point in time do you start to see that the endowment is actually better than spending it outright?
I think along with the endowment too, a lot of times when it's described, people describe it as just keeping the money here and keeping it for an extended period of time. But you also have the aspect of, you know, just using that interest allows you to take donations, put it in the endowment. So you're actually growing that wealth too.
Yeah.
So not only is that 5% leaving, but it's also staying here and it's also growing. So that plays a huge impact.
Well, and that goes back to that whole trust issue, because everybody's scared to death that somebody, if they're holding your money, is making a ton of money that you didn't have access to, you know. And again, we have to like create that trust factor that an endowment is not making anybody super rich, you know. So
Well, I also think transparency is going to be crucial. Is we are talking about what we do and what it looks like. I mean, this information is public information anyhow. You know, anybody can go out and look up, you know, someone's 990, but what if we had it in hand when we're having a conversation? Let's don't make folks look for it. Let's have the information readily available so that we can say, this is what it looks like. This is how much we have. You know, this is, you know, I don't know how it's, you know, some things could be restricted or not or whatever, but be as transparent as possible rather than making people go dig for information. And, you know, have a list of funded projects. I would even go as far, well, I don't know. No, I started to say maybe even tell people things that you didn't fund, but we are going through a strategic plan process right now, which is kind of allowing us to give very specific priorities to certain funding streams. So that is something you would also want to be able to share, is your strategic plan and what your funding priorities are going to be and things like that. So I just think transparency is going to be critical, because I agree with you, Sandy. There's a lot of people that are vying for charitable contributions, and there is a lot of ways people can get tax breaks by giving money. They can give money to churches, they can give money to nonprofits, they can give money to, I mean, you know, the list goes on and on. So why the community foundation? And we have to we just have to have our ducks in a row, not to trump any particular nonprofit or other donation opportunity, but that we are as good as and trustworthy enough for them to put our money with us. So.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot of good messages beyond the numbers that we could share about the transfer of wealth, I think. And it is what we hope that these, we're calling it strategic community investment plans, but that's the idea, is that we are creating this document that you're talking about, or a portion of this document that would allow you to say, if you give to our community foundation, here's the difference that we're going to make in the community with your investment. So any other thoughts on these notes? And I will share all these notes out with the materials so we can continue thinking on this. Would you like to watch that video one more time with the conversation that we've had in mind and see what other thoughts you have about it? And this time with the music?
I can go either way. I'm yours for 7 more minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, we will quickly, I'm going to have to stop sharing and then reshare. Let me go back up here. Find that link. And this time I'll turn it on so you guys can see or can hear the sound. And so given the conversation we've had, just think now about, this is going to let me do this. It's not. Think about we're going to get there. Think about the message that you see here now. Can you all see my screen there?
I can see your emails.
You can see my emails?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that didn't work.
I can hear the music.
All right. I'm working on it here. Let me unshare and share again. Apologies, guys.
It's all right. I just mail merged and made some envelopes, and it took like 2 solid days to figure it out. So I'm
Ah.
That can be tricky, Sandy.
Golly, why is it so tricky? It just, oh my
I
God.
always cheat and use like the mail merge wizard that is built in. I don't know if that's really cheating, but
even then it just, and you get along and you're like, oh no, that's a middle name. No.
yeah.
Okay. Now do you see the video screen?
Yep.
All right.
And can hear it.
Yes. Okay, so that is basically, so I'm hoping that as you saw that the second time after our conversation, some of the things stuck a little better was the reason I wanted to share that one more time. But we are essentially finished up now with our webinar for today. The last thing I wanted to share with you is that our next webinar is actually going to be one of our potluck lunches, kind of a chat and chew. And that will happen on Tuesday, December the 15th at noon. And we just want to kind of do some celebrations from this year, look forward to 2021, maybe hear from the Community Foundation about what's been going on with their strategic planning that they've been doing. And so that is our next webinar date. So thank you all, everybody, for joining today. And
Donna, is that going to end our, I mean, are we doing this next year?
We are going to be doing this next year.
Oh,
so
okay.
We'll continue working with you all. And that's one reason we wanted to have this lunch, is to look forward, kind of ahead to next year and you know, see what it is you all want to learn about. And yeah, so.
Okay.
All righty. So thank you all. Everybody
Bye,
have a great.
John doesn't. Bye, John.
Everybody have a great day.
All right. See you, Donna.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Bye.